Okay, we're doing quotes from this book here, The Holy Grail of Wisdom Quotes by me, Pete Rogers. We're going in alphabetical order. We're on the letter G. We'll do just one quote by Galileo. I have more quotes on Galileo. I like Galileo. I actually wrote my freshman paper on Galileo when I took the one-year course at Stanford in Western civilization. And it's funny, but looking back at Stanford, my favorite classes at Stanford when I was an undergraduate, I majored in biology, were Western civilization, one-year class, the entire full year, and then biochemistry. Biochemistry because that's what relates the most to what I'm interested in, nutrition and health. And Western civilization because that's what relates the most to life in general. Okay, so anyways, Galileo's quote, passion is the source of genius. And I would say there's a lot of truth in that you've got to be excited about something in order to become a genius at it. Because to become a genius at it, what that means is you have to be so good at it that you can transform the field. To get that good, you have to put in a way above average effort. And so that requires, a passion for the subject. And not a passion like in a dippy BS way, but like Goethe had said, in order for a man to learn a complex topic, he must love it. And again, my mindset when I was a young guy was biochemistry is the language of God that he uses to write the book of life. And that's what got me excited to learn it. And that's why I think that if you look at history, most of the great achievements have been done by Christians. Okay, yeah, there's tons of exceptions to that. But overall, foundational achievements in lots of things have come from Christians saying, I shall try to please God, or I do this, devote to God, the music of Bach, the art of Michelangelo, the science of Isaac Newton, etc. And so what I'm trying to say is that mentality of I'm doing what God wants me to do by learning this beautiful thing and sharing it with other people, that leads to great achievement. And that's why I say this push in the public schools in the modern world to get God out of the picture is wrong. It's wrong at the most foundational level. And it's causing a decline in achievement. Look at the medical system. Why does it do so many evil, bad, dishonest things? Because there's no God in it. There's no God involved. It's just atheistic Darwinism, which says that man, nothing special about man, he's just a talking monkey. So I won't go any more into that, but I'm just telling you is, if you want great achievement, teach the kid to read the Bible. Teach the kid about the great achievement of their ancestors, about the great achievements of Western civilization. That will inspire them. Okay, Galileo continues. In the sciences, the authority of thousands of opinions is not worth as much as one tiny spark of reason in an individual man. If reasoning were like pulling rocks, then several reasoners might be better than one. But reasoning is like a horse race, where one stallion easily outruns 100 plow horses. Okay, and I like that. I like that because it's the idea that one person can do something great and special. And that's kind of nice. And it's still true. Most great achievements come from single individuals, which is nice. If you use your brain and put a lot of effort and time into something, you could do something really good. Okay, Francis Galton was a cousin of Charles Darwin, and he said, as it is easy to obtain by careful selection a permanent breed of dogs or horses gifted with peculiar powers of running or of doing anything else, so it would be quite practicable to produce a highly gifted race of men by judicious marriages during several consecutive generations. Other people have made that argument before, like Plato had that argument as well, as have many others in the history. Okay, the USA used to do something very much like that. We're not going to get into all that right now, but there's a long-standing debate on that. And it also makes the question of when should you get married? Because one of the things I noticed is that when you're in high school, if you go to big high school, you know everybody, and you can pick a person who might have good long-term prospects. When you're in college, it depends where you go to college. If you go to a place like an Ivy League school or Stanford, that's probably actually bad for meeting somebody, because I went to those places, and I can tell you tons of guys I know, the guys who would be the most likely to have 5 girlfriends in high school had none in college. Versus if you go to a state school, there's tons more people around. Things are much more social. And what I'm trying to say is you have a pick from a lot of people who you're going to marry. Versus if you pick your future spouse after you are entered the working world, there's not that many people around. A lot of the good men and women have already been married off. You don't get to meet that many people. You're very, very busy. So your selection pool is much, much smaller than it was when you were college age. So even though people say you should wait till you know who you really are, fully developed and all that, the trade-off is your selection choices are much smaller. And then other people say, well, I'll go to the dating apps. But the dating apps, anybody who's actually been on them, they're kind of crazy, and they're very much against the men. Okay, I mean, they are really against the men. They're designed to make it bad for the men. Believe me, I know exactly what I'm talking about. I have experience in that area, okay? And I thought it's bad for me. I'm a pretty, successful guy. I can imagine how bad it is for most other guys. It was ridiculous. It was a waste of time. Okay, Kelly Gallagher. He's the author of a book called Readicide, teaching kids grade school, high school level is what he writes about. And he's pretty good. Here's some things that he says. When my students come to me, they think confusion is bad, but they are wrong. Confusion is a place where learning occurs. Start by telling kids that why they need to learn to write, and then when they see the value in it, they're more willing to buy into it and be willing to learn it. Okay, and then he's got this little abbreviation, WYDIWG, and what it means is what you test is what you get. And he sort of laments about how teaching is too much focused on preparing for standardized tests. But I think he's also a little bit missing the punchline here. What I mean by that is, just like that other, in the past I talked about a book called The Book Whisperer by a 6th grade teacher. She just let the kids read whatever they want. They would read 43 books a year in comparison with a typical classroom where they're forced to read 1 or 2 a year and they hate it and nobody really learns it. And it's almost a waste of time. So what I'm trying to say is if you can just encourage the kids to read and learn on their own, guide them in that way, you'll end up with better results overall. Okay, so here's what Kelly Gallagher has to say. Students who read the most for fun are the ones who score the highest on standardized reading and writing tests. The top 2% of students read at least 90 minutes a day, which comes out to 4.7 million words per year. The bottom 10% of students read only about 50,000 words per year. And what I can say is my father had a very good influence on me when I was young. He was always reading books, and he would argue about books with his brother who would come over on the holidays. And I would also, his brother was kind of a jerk, and he was nasty, and he would insult and yell at us. And so I wanted to read books. I'd go to the bookstore with my father every 3 months or so. My dad would buy 10 books. I'd buy 4 or 5. And I'd try to have them read to argue with them about my uncle. And what I'm trying to say is having that thought in my mind's eye that this is what a man does, read books and discusses them, that really helped me. Because I was always reading a lot. I kind of hated school when I was young. Because I think I was just real smart. I would do the homework in 5 seconds, and then I would goof off, try to make my friends laugh, and I was always in trouble. I was always suspended. I had solitary confinement for 2 years, 3rd and 4th grade, and I frickin' hated school. I would ditch school. I actually ran away from school. I hated school, okay? And that's because they were terrible to me. They wouldn't leave me alone and just let me be myself. And I was always a troublemaker, joking around, making my friends laugh. So anyways, what I'm trying to say is I read on my own. And I mention that because even though I didn't really have that good of grades at all in grade school, in junior high, and even high school, I wasn't that good a student. I never took an honors class. But because I read a lot on my own, I would do pretty well in the standardized tests. I mean, I went and took the SAT test. And I had gone out the night before. I didn't care about it when I was a junior. I envisioned myself as a future athlete, a future national champion wrestler. So I took the test, and I still got like a 1200, okay, because I was reading all the time. I read a lot on my own. But then I went and met a whole bunch of other guys that had done much better than me. All the cross-country runner guys were scoring in the 1300s or 1400s, and I'm like, holy crap. Why are they so much better than me? And I was pissed off, and so I started buying the books to study on your own. And I started studying on my own. Over and over, I'd go through those books. And I retook the test, and my score just kept going up, 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 up. So the point I'm saying is my IQ, my theoretical brain tissue didn't change, but my desire to do well had gone up, and my preparation for the test. And I went up like about 270 points from there. Okay, or more than that, 300 points, something like that. I don't remember. It was a long time ago, but I went up a lot on the test. And anybody could do that if they wanted to. So the point I'm saying is, I think it's best to just get kids involved in learning. I like the, John Taylor Gatto approach better than anything else. He encourages the kids to learn about things they're interested in. You got to try to work that in. Because the way they teach in school, they make it suck. I think that's pretty much like almost all institutions in the United States are being actively destroyed. And what they do is, even though the teachers want to help the kids, it's kind of like the medical profession. The doctors want to help the patient. The people who actually set up the educational system, the people who set up the medical educational system and set up the academic, educational system, they hate the students. They hate the patients, okay? They want to take their money and actually damage them, okay? I tell you that because unless you realize that, you really have much less chance of successfully getting through school or successfully getting through the healthcare system. Once you understand that, you'll realize you can find individual doctors that want to help you, but don't trust the standard of the system because it's not your friend. Okay, a curriculum steeped in multiple choice test preparation drives shallow teaching and learning. Yeah, who gives a rat's tail about a bunch of vocabulary words? Those have no significance to your life. When you read a book and you learn about characters that inspire you, that's valuable. Like on my own, I used to read the Encyclopedia Brown books. He's sort of like a child detective. I liked that, okay? That had a positive effect on me, okay? I can remember, too, like I was reading books that were just too advanced for me when I was young. I wanted to read Tess of the D'Urbervilles because my father read that book, and we watched the BBC English Theater version movie of Tess of the D'Urbervilles. So I read the book, and I didn't really understand. I didn't have the emotional experience, life experience to understand it, but it gave me a good vocabulary. Even though I didn't really understand the story, I understood the words in an individual sense that I could spell well. And things like that. Like when I was a freshman at wrestling camp, I remember I bought for a book, some other guy said to me, "What the hell are you reading?" I bought Bertrand Russell's History of Western Philosophy. And of course, I didn't understand it as a little freshman in high school, but I was constantly exposed to advanced vocabulary. I understood some of the words, but I didn't get the bigger picture because I was young. I look back on all that stuff, and I really don't have much of a memory of those movies I would watch with my father and talk about, things like The Mayor of Casterbridge, the Thomas Hardy novel, and some of those other books that I would read and try to talk about with my dad. I was just too young. But I did have a good spelling and vocabulary from that experience. Okay, now he goes on to life for a teacher. Being held responsible really means one thing to classroom teachers. Teaching to mandated exams administered each spring. Teachers are in an unwinnable situation. Either they teach all the standards in a shallow way or they have to slow down and teach deeply, thus sacrificing test scores. Yeah, I think the whole multiple choice testing, it's done for two reasons. I think it's partly done to make sure you waste the kids' time. And also there's a little bit of a selection process, sort of like to say, only the top 20% at memorization and conformity will be allowed to go on to the next thing. It's almost like they select you to be conformist, like an accountant or something, to go into medicine. You have to conform to so much BS, jump through so many hoops, and be a good little boy to be allowed to continue to the next level, that it actually pushes away the maverick or the creative thinker or the individualist. It really does. You'll notice, ask anybody who's going to a med school, how conformist and wimpy and shallow is the personality content of the place. It's kind of strange, but that's a true statement. You must always conform and obey the standard of care, respect the hierarchy. Okay, but there's not much interest. Very few are actually interested in innovative thinking, discovery, and improvement. Those things, you'll never hear those words in a medical environment, surprisingly. And that's what I meant by wrestling was more intelligent than medicine. When I was a wrestler, we all wanted to win. We were constantly looking for ways to get better. We'd go to a tournament, some guy would come along for a new team and have a new technique. We thought it was great. Randy Lewis from Iowa, Jesse Reyes from Cal State Bakersfield. We're like, wow, look what he's doing, inside trip. How could I do that? Okay, Kelly Gallagher continues. He says, while sanctions and economic penalties dangling overhead, job evaluations hanging in the balance, and the results of each school's performance printed in the newspaper for the community to see, is it any wonder which path most teachers take? It is easier to test for facts than for understanding. Numerous teachers have told me that in this drive to raise test scores, they are no longer allowed to teach novels. In an attempt to raise reading scores, school districts across the country are removing books from kids. Now that's funny. In order to improve reading, they're taking books away from kids. It's so crazy. And they've shortened the writing. All this stuff is geared towards, making things rigid and conformed rather than sort of free-flowing. You should be reading about the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans, Plutarch's lives, great men. What did they do, okay? And, how could you perhaps aspire to be like them? It's good to study the saints, all the great things that they did. That inspires you. There's nothing like the ancient Greeks. You got to study the ancient Greeks, and you really ought to study the Renaissance. You should study the great classical music, the great composers, Beethoven and Bach and Mozart and Handel. You should know about their lives, how they overcame obstacles. That's valuable knowledge, okay? You should know about the great Greek playwrights and Plato and Aristotle and Socrates and all of that. You should know about, Pericles and the sophist and all that stuff. It's very interesting stuff. You should know about Thucydides. Okay, and then what do they do to these kids? They say, freshman year of high school, ninth grade, they require them to read To Kill a Mockingbird. And the reason they're making them read that book is they're trying to say, you're a racist, okay? Everything's done to sort of destroy white Christians, okay? It's sort of like the most important thing in the world is whatever liberal trend is in hand. Nobody talks about things like Ireland currently being destroyed and Jenna, you know what? The next word would be sided, okay? That's no big deal. Oh, but to say the wrong word, that's a microaggression. If you didn't bow down to somebody to congratulate them from having anal, you know what, then sex. It's like, give me a frickin' break, okay? The Irish have been slaves to the British for about 1,000 years, and they're no longer even slaves. Now they're being gotten rid of, okay? They're recruiting, a force from Pakistan to control the Irish, okay? Like they really need that. The rulers are totally against them. It's sad. Anyways, To Kill a Mockingbird is a terrible book. The kids should not be required to read that. Julius Caesar, Julius Caesar is a play to read when you're in college. A high school kid can't understand Julius Caesar. Romeo and Juliet, too. They're not ready to understand Shakespeare. Shakespeare is pretty advanced stuff for somebody who grows up speaking, English from the American background. Great Gatsby's okay, but, I don't remember any of it from when I was a kid. So anyways, he kind of makes the point, I've made the point too, this is most of the major institutions in the USA are sort of being destroyed from within. And same thing has happened to the Catholic Church. It's sort of infiltrated the current popes and Antichrist. So all these institutions, the university system, the grade school system, the high school system, the medical system, they're all being infiltrated from inside by, this side, that's my left side, and destroyed and collapsed and corrupted. And it's sad because a lot of these things used to be good. College professors used to be good in the 1960s, and there's still a lot of them who are good and mean well, but they're kind of overwhelmed by a system which does not have good intentions. So anyways, as an individual, you're responsible to educate yourself, and then you got to jump through the hoops to get your degrees. But it's worth a while to teach yourself how to think, because your whole life you're going to have to make decisions based on your knowledge and your thinking, so it's good to develop it.